r/ask Reddit, what movie mistake is so glaringly obvious that you're surprised it made it into the final cut? In the original 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film, you can see the actor inside Donatello's costume. Evidently this is because of modern high-res screens or something. Back when it was released, I guess it was too muddy to notice. Still, great movie. The cinema release would have enough resolution to make it visible, but then again you wouldn't have been able to go through frame by frame to look for details like that. In Cannonball Run, they spend a good 10 minutes explaining that the races are all starting at different times. The winner will be the one who completes the race in the shortest time, which is not necessarily the first team to finish. At the end they ignore this, and give the trophy to the first team to finish. In the first Harry Potter movie, when Harry and Ron are in the room with the mirror and Harry tosses the invisibility cloak off to one side, you can see the green side of the fabric they usually get rid of in editing. I always noticed this as a kid but didn't work out what it was until I was much older. Just thought the magic was green or something. Transformers Rise of the Fallen has a scene that breaks my brain so much I've had to check to make sure it was real about a dozen times. They go to the National Mall in Washington, D.C. at night. They find the jet that turns out to be an old Transformer. He breaks through a wall and then they are at the airplane graveyard in Tucson, Arizona during the day. I don't care that there isn't a bunch of planes outside in Washington, D.C., movie magic and all that. But we literally go from night to midday and from Washington, D.C. to the freaking middle of the desert. In Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts is eating breakfast at the fancy hotel. She's eating a croissant. Cut to Richard Gere. Cut back to Julia. She's eating a pancake. Cut to Gere. Back to Julia. The croissant is back. In Behind Enemy Lines, the pilot is able to walk a great distance able to reach a specific point for radio communication. It's a spot marked on his map for just such emergencies. During the radio transmission he has to go silent because enemy forces are close by. After cutting chatter, the Admiral gets upset and yells at someone to triangulate his position. Admiral sir. You already know why are you asking to know where he is? Diamonds Are Forever featured a car two-wheeling entering an alley on one side of the car and exiting two-wheeling on the opposite side. They didn't even try to fix it in post. In Home Alone, when Kevin is eating his macaroni and cheese meal, the clock rings 9, then cuts to Kevin blowing out the candles. When the bandits come in, there's a completely different microwavable dinner on the table. In The Mummy 2, when Rick is carrying his son through the jungle to reach the pyramid before the sunrise hits the diamond at the top. The sunlight is hitting the ground first somehow instead of starting at the top, like a normal sunrise. The entirety of this scene in Jaws 3, and before you say anything about being limited by the technology of their time, the original Jaws made a far better shark than whatever the hell this is supposed to be. It's not super obvious, but in Final Destination 3, the roller coaster gets derailed by some guy's camera in the vision. That guy never got on the ride. He's one of the people that gets off. It's always bugged me. In Highlander 2, The Quickening, which is a glaringly obvious movie mistake in its entirety, it is established that there are a series of giant energy shield towers around the Earth, including 2 at near opposite sides of the US. The hero begins a sword duel on one of the towers before the camera shifts elsewhere. When we return to the duel, they've fought their way to the bottom of the tower, on the opposite side of the country. The Fast and the Furious. The line granny shifting, not double clutching like you should. Why the hell would you double clutch during a drag race? Just proved the writers had no clue about cars, much less racing them. In a movie called From Prada to Nada, Alex Avega's character was in a cast half the movie and no one seemed to remember which leg was the broken one, so she'd randomly have a different broken leg in every other scene. Lol. I still can't believe how would they allow that movie to be released like that. I never saw it, but the recent remake of The Stepford Wives has a huge plot hole where the wives were supposedly switched with robots, doing all kinds of weird stunts, but then in the end they all wake up like they were just brainwashed or something. like the director couldn't decide on which evil plot they were using. Fellowship of the Ring, during the scene where Sam talks about being the furthest from home, you can see a car driving in the background, theater version only. They fixed it after Two Towers, in the second last scene, when they're all looking at Mordor. Eomer isn't Eomer. He wasn't available for filming, so they used his stunt double, meant to edit the proper actor's face in later but never did. Return of the King, at the Black Gate after Aragorn's speech, when it shows Gandalf and company when Aragorn looks back, Gimli's face is the stunt double who looks nothing like Gimli. This part is nightmare fuel Jurassic Park. T-Rex comes through the fence at ground level, then proceeds to push the car off a cliff. Where the feck did that cliff come from? He was just standing there. In Batman Forever they just reversed the footage mid-shot of Robin coming up for air. I remember the mistake as a kid watching it in theaters. I guess they needed to remind the audience he was still alive. I'm glad YouTube had a clip and my memory wasn't wrong. In pretty much any zombie movie, when people run to an elevator to get away from the zombies, the doors always seem to close on the zombies trying to get in. They never pop back open like they would if someone actually stuck their hand, or any other limb/object, in the way of the doors. I haven't watched it in a while, but in their newer Dawn of the Dead I'm pretty sure it happens. In episode 2F09, when Itchy plays Scratchy's skeleton like a xylophone, he strikes that same rib twice in succession, yet he produces two clearly different tones. I mean, what are we to believe that this is some sort of a magic xylophone or something? In Castaway, if Tom Hanks would have simply gone to the other side of the island, at the beginning after crashing he climbs to the top and you can see the whole thing. He could have paddled out past the breakwater in calm seas. The end of Godzilla, 2014, completely falls apart, mostly due to bad editing. The soldiers are making a run for the boat with the nuke, and Mama Muto is right on top of them. Then, it cuts to Godzilla, who fights Daddy Muto for a while. He eventually smashes him into a building, killing him, but also bring the building down on Godzilla, crushing him to the floor. Ford escapes from the Muto nest, and has time for a little moment with fallen Godzilla. Then we cut back to Mama Muto, who has completely paused her attack on the soldiers to allow Ford time to get into position. She then decides to quickly finish them off, but this buys time for Ford to escape on the boat. During this fairly brief battle, Godzilla silently picks himself up from under the building, walks over to the dock, tiptoes up behind Mama Muto and is able to take her down with a quick neck chomp, atomic breath combo. Ford tries to escape on the boat with the nuke, which has 5 minutes left of the clock, and needs to be 20 miles away from the city, so needs to be traveling at 240 miles per hour. And, Godzilla, having dealt with the Mutos, decides rather than swimming away, to go back into the city for a nice lie down under that building that crushed him earlier. Seems like Godzilla was supposed to deal with Mama Muto first, but it got butchered in editing, and no one bothered to check. It still made sense, not exactly a mistake, but I used to enjoy Lifetime movies for how ridiculous they were. I flipped one on one night and there were two women talking. One was standing on a ladder so the camera is kind of looking up at her. She had a huge booger in her nose. There was also a TV movie, possibly on Hallmark, but before the Hallmark movie was big, directed by Garth Brooks. It ends with a nice Thanksgiving scene with the camera panning across the family sitting at the table. In the background, you can see a crew member in cargo shorts. He's looking at some kind of equipment and doesn't seem to be aware that the camera is rolling.